ever glanced at something and thought that you totally understood it, only to realize later there was so much more beneath the surface? The truth is that in many situations and many things that we experience in many people's lives and every issue, there are far more complex things going on than what initially appears. When something is described as having more than meets the eye, it serves as a powerful reminder that what we see on the surface often conceals hidden intricacies, important facts, and underlying motives. It is not as simple as it looks when we hear more than meets the eye. It's more complex or more difficult than you first imagined. It is the initial appearance of something that we find ourselves deceived by. And if we're not careful, we can easily fall in a trap of making quick judgments based solely on what our physical eyes can see. After all, life moves at a rapid pace, but the tendency can lead us to serious misjudgments and missed opportunities. The phrase of what we have heard and many times said over and over again, more than meets the eye, has been in use since the early 1800s, warning us of the dangers of making superficial decisions. It allows and alludes us to see that there is something beyond what can be physically seen. So when we add the phrase or say the phrase, there is more than meets the eye, it suggests there are some hidden depths yet to be revealed. It can be used positively or negatively, but when we say something, there is more than meets the eye, it is the fact that we need to look deeper than observing what is right in front of us. When we talk about more than meets the eye, I want to talk to you about John chapter 2, because here in this particular passage, it would suggest to many of us that this is a simple passage. It is the wedding at Cana in Galilee. It is a wedding that Jesus is attending with his disciples and his mother. It is a wedding where we hear of a familiar story. If you have not heard it, it's basic. One of the first miracles that Jesus performs is here at the wedding. Jesus takes water and turn it into wine. And so it seems that we can see everything right up front, that Jesus turned water into wine. That's it, story over. But the reality is there is more to this particular passage than meets the eye. There is more than just turning water into wine, because here in the second chapter of John, we see that Jesus is having a conversation with his mother. The text would let us know that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was a guest to a wedding that she was invited to, and Jesus and his disciples as well were invited guests of this wedding. While at this wedding, they run out of wine, and Jesus' mother turns to him in a very nonchalant manner that she says to Jesus, they have run out of wine. And Jesus' response is like many of us when he returns the conversation back to his mother. Jesus is basically asking his mother, what does this have to do with me? And what does this have to do with you? Why are you even involving me in this situation? Jesus is really almost questioning, why is this of any concern? And here, what we know about this particular passage, Jesus is at the beginning stages of his ministry. He has not, it's interesting, Mike opened with that scripture, he hasn't even started with followers yet. He is just really getting the stage set. He's at right after we hear in John 1, the word is God and the word was God. You understand, Jesus is at the initial entry of why he has come to be. And in this particular passage, as he is at the wedding at Cana and he's standing there with his mother, his mother is very interesting in this, because here we are at a wedding, and what we know about weddings during biblical times is that a wedding and a wedding reception reception is not one day. It is not 6 hours. They don't reserve a room. A wedding during biblical times is a week long. So you can imagine at this point, the guests at this wedding have been there at least 5 days, and now they are out of this wine. And in this particular passage, what is interesting to me, if you read the beginning of the text, when it says on the third day a wedding took place, see, it already lets us know on the third day a wedding took place. Jesus mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had been invited to the wedding. It suggests that they did not come together. It suggests that Jesus did not attend with Mary. It suggests in the text, when we read the text, you see there's more than meets the eye. It would suggest that Mary was a separate invited guest from Jesus and the disciples. And so here they are in this situation. They're at a wedding. But the reality that Mary shows us through this particular text, when they run out of wine, Mary knew who to go to. Mary, initially, her first response was not to go get the master over the wedding party. Her first response was not to go to the servants who were serving at the wedding party. Mary's first response was to go to Jesus. Why would she go to Jesus? Because Mary knew what he was capable of. Anybody know when you had a situation going on and you can't quite figure it out? Go to the source. Mary went to the one she knew was capable and well able to do what was needed to be done in that moment. But Jesus is like caught in a situation, because Jesus is like, why are you involving me? The hour has not come. The reason that Jesus is having this conversation is that this wedding party is greater than what we see. This miracle is beyond just turning water into wine. Jesus is talking to Mary, inferring that there is coming a time that there will be a wedding banquet. There will be a wedding party, and it'll be greater than this. But now is not the time. Jesus was talking back to his mother, not because he was upset with her, not because he didn't know what she was asking. She was suggesting that now is not the right time for this. Now isn't the wedding. It's a prelude to what's to come. And so Jesus, in his conversation with his mother, what Mary does next is interesting. She doesn't stop and leave the story alone. Mary then turns to the servants after he says to his mother, why does this involve me? She turns to the servants and said, do whatever Jesus asks you to do. Do whatever he is asking next of you. What I am looking at in the beginning part of this text, it would seem like a mere conversation, but already in the first 5 verses, there is something to learn here, because what Mary is teaching us, that when we are in a space, we need to know who Jesus is and what Jesus is capable of. But not only does she teaches us that, what we also hear is Mary being able to share with the servants a level of authority in what she's saying, because she's talking as a guest to the servants who's saying, do whatever he tells you. You know, a mother, I've never been a mother, but I have learned that when my mother speaks, or an elder mother speaks, and they tell you to do something, you do it. It ain't always what feels good. But wisdom says they might actually know what they're talking about. And so she tells the servants to do whatever Jesus tells them to do. And so standing nearby were 6 stone water jars, the kind that were used for Jewish ceremonial washing, which would hold 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus says to the servants, fill the jars with water and fill them to the brim. Then he told the servants, now draw some water out and take it to the master of the banquet. And so the servants did exactly what Jesus told them to do. Now, what is interesting about this particular text, as I was studying, the thing here with this text, that if you have been in confirmation, where my confirmants at? We all went to the Jewish synagogue, right? And at the Jewish synagogue, they taught us about the ceremonial washing. It was important as you prepare yourself for what is next. It was important that you did a ritual bath when it was time for a new season in your life. And so it's interesting that the jars that were used were the Jewish jars that symbolizes a shift was about to happen. It was the Jewish jars that were used for ceremonial washing, which indicated it was time for purification. They are using jars, and now they have this water in these jars. But what the servants and what Jesus is showing us in this text here is more than meets the eye, because now they are using what's available. When Jesus gets ready to do a miracle, when Jesus is getting ready to bless you, he will use what's available. So Jesus takes these jars and pours water in these jars. Jesus doesn't pour the water. They draw the water. They put the water in the jar. The servants follow his instructions exactly as he asked them to. And somewhere in the midst of that, Jesus now takes this water and turns it into wine. And when they get through, the piece that gets me is that the servants had a front row seat to this miracle. The servants had a front row seat to seeing the shift that was about to happen. Now catch this. Everybody is invited to this wedding. In biblical times, that means the servants were beneath the people at the wedding. They were to serve. And Jesus takes the servants and allows them to see this miracle. But the miracle doesn't happen if the servants don't take action. Church, what the message in here, when we look at there's more than meets the eye, what the servants are teaching us even today. When Jesus speaks, when Jesus asks you to do something, when Jesus is on your road, when you find yourself in a place where there is something more, that you have to take action. The servants took actions and they followed instructions. And when the water was turned into wine, the next thing that the servants did, they took the wine to the master, just as Jesus had asked them to do. And the master tasted the water that had been turned into wine. Catch this, but the master of the banquet did not realize that it was water. He did not know where the wine came from. He had no clue that the water had been turned into wine, which makes me believe as a reader, it doesn't mean that the master didn't even know they were out of what was needed for the banquet to continue. But Jesus was invited to this party. And when the master tastes this particular wine, he turns to the bridegroom. He turns to the bridegroom and he says, wait a minute, check this. Taste this here. This is better than anything that we would have served. And it's so interesting because I couldn't understand the text. I have to read and reread, and then I have to listen to the text. Because when the master talks to the bridegroom and says to the bridegroom in verse number 10, he says, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink, but you have saved the best till now. What is interesting to me is that the master of this wedding had no clue that the wine was out. Now, in the biblical times, if weddings last for 5 to 7 days or a week longer, however many days, at some point he had to know that it was going to get empty. But not only did he know that it was going to get empty, it's amazing that even his guests were going to get the worst that was last. The guests were going to get shortchanged. He says to the bridegroom, wait a minute, the way this works, the best comes out first, and then it gets a little bit worse as it goes down, because that's what cheaper is. Cheaper is not the best. Cheaper is the worst. But then he realizes the bridegroom, when he's speaking to the bridegroom, he's saying, but now with this, you have saved the best for last. And as I begin to dissect this text and begin to look at this miracle and begin to ask myself, well, why is it more than meets the eye? Because what we realize in this particular text that the servants, catch this, and the disciples were two different people that were on one thing. The servants were there to serve, and the disciples were invited guests. But the purpose of the wedding wasn't about celebrating the wedding. The purpose of the wedding was so that the disciples could believe. The purpose of the wedding in which they were invited to was so that they would have evidence of who Jesus is about to be. The wedding was all a part of a situation so that the disciples could see the hand of God in their beginning. Why is that important? Because Jesus is showing and is talking and is doing what he's doing. He is giving tangible evidence so that the disciples would believe who they were following. We serve a God that will give us tangible evidence that when we are following Christ, that we will know who Jesus is. This was more than meets the eye. It was bigger than a wedding party. The wedding may have happened, but it was bigger than just running out of wine. Jesus was allowing the disciples to have some power in their testimony. When he turns the water into wine, he was revealing his glory to those who have followed him. Wait a minute. But the text gets better, because I'm still saying if the analogy is there more than meets the eye, and there's something and a more deeper meaning here. When we talk about more than meets the eye, the disciples were invited guests. They're the people to follow Jesus. Jesus' mother, who already knew who his was an invited guest. All these people around and nobody else saw the miracle, but the servants did. The servants knew what Jesus had done. And the reality is that when we are serving Jesus, in the midst of serving Jesus, we ought to be able to see some signs and wonders. When we are serving Jesus, when we take action, when we follow the instructions of Jesus the Christ, we will be able to see the miracles. Anybody in here ever found themselves in a situation and you're asking yourself, how am I going to get out of this? Why is this the job that God gave me? This is not where I thought it would be. This is not the job that I applied for. My boss is running, not my boss. Now, don't y'all take this literal. It's an analogy. My boss is driving me up the wall. My boss is giving me problems. I applied for a job, but I'm not necessarily doing what my gifts and talents are. But Jesus shows up, and he will use any situation to make a miracle. And the servants were just doing their job. The servants were doing what they were called to do. The servants were in the place that they were supposed to be in. Just imagine this. They weren't even invited. They weren't even supposed to taste the wine. They didn't even get to eat the food, but what they did get to do is see the miracle. But the miracle is still more than meets the eye. Because as Jesus' initial entry into his ministry, as this is his first miracle, as he is performing and revealing his true glory, it's all a part of the master's plan. It's interesting that he uses a wedding, but it's not interesting. It's more than meets the eye. Because at the end of the times, what we know about Jesus and what we know about the Bible and what we know about the story is that there is a day that Jesus is coming for his church. And what does he refer to the church as? Come on, saints. What does he refer to the church? He's coming back for who? The bridegroom. Jesus is coming back. He refers to the church in the analogy of a wedding party. And today is communion. And when we do the communion liturgy, it talks about sitting at a heavenly banquet where there is what? Wine. Jesus is the one who is inviting us to be a part of the miracles and signs and wonders that he's doing on earth now. So that when we get to the table, we have the capacity to say we believed because we saw him do it. In this first miracle, Jesus knew what he had been destined to do. Jesus knew why he had come to earth. He knew that he was to be the Savior of the world. But he wanted to provide the glory so that they would believe. No matter what you are going through right now, the part that blesses me in this text, the glory was revealed to those who were following him and serving him. As I prepare to close, the piece that blesses me, this text gives us tangible evidence in 2024 as followers and servants of Jesus Christ. We will be invited to see his miracles. We will be invited to participate in what Jesus is doing. But it's sometimes greater than what we initially see. Some of us, God is calling to do some great work. And if we look at the initial onset, we may say, this is it. What I see is what I get. But I remember a pastor of mine, he would always say to me every time, he said, he would always call me by my last name, Brantley, what are you called to do? I'm called to work with children, called to work with youth. And he said, are you sure? I'm like, you questioning me? I've been talking to God about this. I know. But because he saw me serving in other areas and other things, he said, there's more depth to what God is calling you to. But I was looking at where I was, not where God was taking me. And if I would just look at a situation for what it is, I may miss the miracle. I invite you today to appreciate the invitations you get to places that seem different, because it may be God calling us to something greater. Amen.
1,000 generations falling down in worship to sing the song of ages to the Lamb. And all who've gone before us and all who will believe will sing the song of ages to the Lamb. Your name is the highest, your name is the greatest, your name stands above them all thrones and dominions, all powers and positions, your name stands above them all, and the angels cry, holy, all creation